Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is Scott Bradfield. This is the post-gym, my brief for journeying to the gym a couple times a week edition, in which I put a nice shirt on over my sweatpants. I'm breaking through the fourth wall and dispelling the illusion of technical perfection, which is the bathtub. So today we're talking about one of my favorite Nabokov novels, which is SINISTER. I'm a big fan of a lot of the Nabokov. Sorry, pals, don't text me. Good God, Nabokov. SINISTER. It's one of his mid-period novels, and it's one of his first in English. He wrote in English, so he translates his early books from Russian into English, or translates most of them with his son eventually, and he starts writing in English. I bought a couple, maybe one book before this. Again, we're not, go check your Wikipedia or whatever. We're not Wikipedia. So this is one I quite like. It's a really nasty book. It's very funny. It's beautifully put together. It's very puzzling, like most of Nabokov's books. It's easily the most upsetting book he's written. So I have to warn you right away. It's upsetting and very funny, and the humor is very black. So SINISTER, let's just be readers in the bathtub. It's a move, a shift to something unpleasant. That's all you need to know. But it's also a term from heraldry. And this is the sort of stuff I promise not to do usually in the bathtub. But with Nabokov, you got to kind of at least indicate this is all out there if you want to go look. It's a line from heraldry, and again, don't quote me on any of this stuff and don't reply because I don't personally care about heraldry, but it concerns the bend, a bend in a heraldry symbol from the upper right-hand corner of the person wearing it to the bottom left hand, and the left hand is the sinistral. Sinistral, the leftward leaning, the disturbing side. It's kind of an interesting little shift to think about because I guess, and I just learned this from Wikipedia 10 seconds ago, the notion of honor and family is up in this section, and the shift is towards other things. And that's sort of a good thing to remember when you're reading SINISTER. Again, what I always recommend, because I'm promising not to do this in the bathtub, is to be an expert on any of these books. But many years ago, I did read books like this amazing 2-volume, this is the second volume of the Brian Boyd biography, and for really good, accurate, extremely intelligent analysis of each text, each book, you can get Boyd. He's brilliant, and he was working with Nabokov, and he knows whereof he speaks. Okay, so SINISTER is disturbing in a whole bunch of ways and very funny in a bunch of ways, and I won't be able to get into all of them because I don't want to tell you what happens to some extent. It begins with a real interesting introduction. So it's one of the few novels of his I remember where Nabokov does give us like an 8 or 10 page introduction of what he wants to do in his book, and it's again from this mid-period that I quite like. It takes a few readings to get to enjoy these books, but Invitation to a Beheading, someone mentioned having trouble with in our group, and I agreed the first time, but I actually like these mid-period books a lot. They're very strange adventures for Nabokov because he doesn't want to write political books, and the opening of this is about that disinterest in writing political books, books with messages, books that are giving us information or an argument about things. So he mentions at the beginning of this Kafka, a great writer to Nabokov, and Orwell, awful writer, because he thinks he dismisses Orwell as a pedantic writer, a writer who's trying to make arguments. And he does that because this book is filled with a political anxiety about totalitarian movements, fascism, and Stalinism. It's not fair to call it communism, but Stalinism in Russia, and these huge mass movements which actually displaced Nabokov and his family, and from which he was pretty much fleeing for much of his life, which is why he moved to Berlin. And this fear of these movements wasn't just political, but they were as they were for Orwell, something that was in the culture around him. The culture is of conformity, of anonymity of individuals, the focusing of power in certain figures, the Stalinist bullies, the Maoist bullies, the Trumpian bullies, and the bullies who would actually establish power by getting stupid people to hate somebody. And that's really that's what this book is about how these figures who are basically cowardly bullies. The dictator of SINISTER is named Paduk. Everyone has this kind of weird anagrammatic name in this kind of East European maybe country. And there's been a revolution at the very beginning of the book, and the shift away from family and love, which is beautifully detailed in this book, of a very Nabokovian, a very Nabokov-like family, husband, wife, and son, is beautifully rendered and very emotional. At the very beginning of the book, the hero of the book, Adam Krug, one of the few nice guys one of the few nice people who is the central hero of a Nabokov book, and a horrible life, horrible things happen to him. And he's a philosopher, and he loses his wife. His wife dies, and it's just a revolution has just occurred in this country. And the people who have taken over the country are called the Equilisms, the Equilist order. Again, I can't remember how you pronounce it. Equilists, who have a philosophy which is all people are the same. So it's a satire on what some people might call communism. But the notion that all human beings are the same. There's no people who are better or worse than anybody else. And in this world, everyone's exactly the same and kind of has the same spiritual values in each of them. And Paduk, he becomes the big kingpin of this revolutionary force. He was basically a kid in school who the central character Krug used to bully. So again, he basically, Trump looks like someone who would have been bullied if he wasn't rich. They were basically big, fat, silly-looking people, and this guy Paduk had been bullied by Krug, and now he's become the kingpin of this revolutionary force. And I don't want to. I'm talking too much about this as politics because Nabokov doesn't want us to think in politics. He really gets us enmeshed in a novel, and the novel is about this man who is walking across the bridge from his death of his wife to go home to his son, and there used to be this very tight emotional bond between these three. And he goes home after this revolution, and all this bureaucracy is taken over. There's some very funny stuff. Most of the book is very funny about going home and all the different people stamping passports back and forth across this bridge, and the comedy of this nightmare. And he goes home, he tries to resume his old life with his son, and some of the most beautiful parts of it are just the kind of daily rituals that you go through with a small child. And he does that stuff. Nabokov does this stuff so well. Just about the little toys, the things they say, the little rituals you go through to get them to go to bed. Really affectionate. And this is what really makes Nabokov's very difficult books so powerful, is he really does, in the middle of them, have this great emotional grasp of his characters. So this really kind of lovely relationship between this man and his son after the mother's died, as this revolutionary power has taken over this city, and the bully, the Stalin-like, Trump-like character who's taken over this world, he wants to get Krug to be a spokesman for the party, because he's considered one of the smartest people and the philosopher of the world, of this world, and he wants him to sanction the revolution and sanction the principles of Ekwilism, if that's what it's called. And Krug says, piss off, and slowly all the people around him who he loves start to vanish. Okay, so that's the story. As with all Nabokov novels, I cannot stop doing it, so just don't write me, is that he's focusing on this shift in this individual's life, but it's also being filtered to us through a sort of anonymous narrator. Let me say that one last time because it took a while getting it across. All of Nabokov's books have some element of this in it, but in Ben Sinister, we have an I person. The very first 5-10 pages of Ben Sinister are very tricky and hard to follow. And there are many passages in it when this kind of inchoate narrator, who is a Nabokov-like character, a writer, is explaining to us what's happening and showing us particularly mirror images in the world. At the beginning, I believe, Krug is looking out the window at a reflection of the building he's in. And that's being rendered to us by this author. And the fact that there is an author out there designing this world is always important in Nabokov for us to realize. And we come back, that focus for the book keeps coming back. And some of those passages are confusing. So do keep that in mind. We often go into long little shifts. For example, there's a long passage in which one of Krug's friends does an interpretation of Hamlet and how Hamlet should be read. And it starts off as a very reasonable analysis of Hamlet, and then it gets more and more unreasonable over a course of about 20 pages. It's a pretty funny passage. But it's easy to get lost in some of these, and I know the first times I read Ben Sinister, I had trouble with it. This time I haven't had as much trouble. I can recognize when we're getting that authorial presence. And one of the things that's interesting about that is, one, we're getting this vision of a comic vision, a funny vision. So it's 1984, which is pretty funny too in parts, but a really kind of comic vision of what a nightmare stupidity. There's some hilarious scenes because the most brutal people in this world are incredibly stupid. Trump is a perfect example. They're just stupid. And they're constantly saying stupid things in order to promote their power over everybody else. And they're real morons. And a lot of them are kind of high school kids with pimples and their girlfriends, and they're wandering around being the Gestapo of this police force. And they're just complete idiots. And those are really funny passages. And in the midst of these funny passages, they're doing horrible things. And there's the closing 30, 40 pages in which basically I'm going to give you a little warning here. Krug loses his son he loves. It is a horrifying passage, incredibly funny. And you don't really see any of the brutality, but it's all indicated. And then Krug, what happens to Krug is just monumentally appalling. It's probably the worst destruction of a character I've ever seen in one of Nabokov's novels, much worse than what happens to Humbert, who sort of deserves it. This guy sort of doesn't deserve it, and it's even worse. And in the course of it, you are really just driven, you are drawn through these last pages. In the course of those closing pages, the Nabokov-type controller of the marionettes comes and goes and says things such as, I'm not going to let this man suffer. I've created this arena of suffering, and I can't let him suffer anymore. It's a really powerful and strange, and there's mystical connection between this writer and the sense of imagination creating the book and an ability to get out of this nightmare and an inability to get out of it. I can't explain it any more than that. It really enmeshes you in all the beauties and intricacies and horrors of imagining beautiful works of art. And it does even close on Nabokov it closes on the notion of butterflies and the beauty of butterflies, even while you're killing these things, and the rapturous and horrific nature of mothing. Mothing is the last word of the book. Okay, that's a really poor, I know, usually most of these things are pretty poor approximations of what I love about the books. I love this book. It's really an upsetting book to me. It takes me a while to think about it or put it away before I can talk about it, so I've forgotten bits and pieces. But I would recommend it. I want to do all of the mid-period Nabokov books. I really like this. I love this one. I actually really love Invitation to a Beheading now, and Sebastian Knight I like as well. This is tough. I think it's possibly the most powerful of his books in some ways. And it's not because it's talking about totalitarianism, but he's connecting totalitarianism to a lot of other things while never giving up on his idea that writing a book is an act of beauty, and that involving the reader in that act of beauty is still a paramount purpose of this narrative. Okay, I love the book. We'll do more, and we'll come back to Nabokov eventually. And happy reading, happy bathing. Bye.